this meeting of the Medical Advisory Ad Hoc Committee to order. The 3 board members are present, and I believe everyone who's a normal attendee is present either via Zoom or in person. And so that's the roll call. I'd just like to have an approval of our last meeting's minutes. There's a motion.
So moved.
And we have Aaron. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Jack. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no.
Aye.
And then there's approve the agenda. So if there be a motion to approve the agenda,
Motion to approve the agenda.
Brian, and a second.
Second.
Second from Brian. Hello, Brian.
Brian.
And since any questions, motion to approve, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. And that takes us right to Randy for number 5 for the progress of where we're at right now.
All right, thank you, Dave. Tonight what we are going to start off with is some of our reviewing our dashboard data and some of our internal processes and then some of our community-wide data. We'll also be looking for some feedback on a few operational items that we would like your feedback on. Once we get through a few of those operational pieces, we'll review our county-wide data and our community data so that you can have a sense of really what's happening within the Waunakee region. And then the last item we'll talk about today is some of the school reopening items and the plans that are going to be considered by the board at their next meeting at 7 o'clock. The first thing is just talking about contact tracing and staffing. And I think on this committee, our folks who've been most engaged with the contact tracing are Kurt and Brian and Jenny. So if I could just have them provide a bit of an update on how our contact tracing is going, where we're at with the hiring process there, and just kind of a summary of what that process has looked like since we were last together. So maybe I can start with Kurt, and then Jenny, and then Brian.
Sure. We have one full-time contact tracer on board. She's been on board, this will be the third week. That's been a great help to our efforts to contact trace. We've had a little bit more activity, I would say, in the last couple of weeks' time frame. We have been able to get everything done within the day that we receive information about an incident or incidents. We've been able to get it done within that day. So that's been positive because that's been our goal all along, is to be able to get it done. I do believe that we are starting to hear about more cases of people being positive or being close contacts from our community that we didn't hear about the last time we met. I think more people are letting us know, and in the particular population I'm kind of referencing are our students who are in all virtual learning. Parents are letting us know more that they have a child who is either tested positive or that they've had a close contact because of something either in the family or that they've been to that has tested positive. So I think we're getting a little bit better picture of what's happening through our contact tracing pieces in the community. Are we getting everything? No, I don't think we're getting everything, but I do think we're getting a higher percentage of what's going on in our community in regards to that. Jenny, is there anything you want to say about how the process is working? You're closer to the process and how that's working.
Sure. Can you hear me, everybody? I'm using a headset I've never used. Okay, thank you.
Rebecca, can you just turn
I would say that the process is going pretty well. In general, I feel like, you know, we're familiar with the protocols and the email templates and the scripting. Everything that we've created, I think, now has been tweaked enough to say that it's working well. Our process is good, and everybody is familiar enough. We've used it enough that we're comfortable with it. As far as, you know, the contact tracer, she's been with us, as Kurt said, 2 or 3 weeks. This is her second full week on her own, and she's doing a really good job. The task is not on her 100% yet at this point. The health staff is definitely still helping and involved, but overall I would say the process is going pretty well.
Great. Thanks, Jenny.
I guess one thing I'll add before I turn it over to Brian, the other thing that's happened within the last 2 weeks is we're also having a better communication flow between our 4K partners and our child care centers, so that if something's happening in their environment, they're letting us know, and we're doing the same if something happens in our environment, and we know that there's a link to their environment, we're letting them know about that as well. So that has improved also in the last couple of weeks.
Great. Brian, how about from your perspective in HR and what you're seeing?
I would say my conversations have focused generally with staff, as we work through that. And certainly I think what we're seeing in the staff mirrors what we're seeing in our student body, that there is greater activity right now, and we're experiencing that. Again, I think the process is working well. It's consistent students to staff, and so that has really helped the communications as well going out afterwards. And the only thing I would add to that is from a staffing perspective, our second school nurse will begin tomorrow. It's her first day with our district, and we currently have our posting active for our second contact tracer, so that that person can get into the system and get trained in anticipation of additional need and additional students coming in.
Great, thanks, Brian. Kurt, Jenny, any questions from the committee about some of the things that we're doing with regards to contact tracing or any of those aspects?
Hey guys, this is Jeff. I know that you were working on making sure you could contact trace within 24 hours of notification. Are you still able to meet that metric? Is that happening?
Yes, we have been able to do that.
Okay.
Some days we get close, but we've always made it before our normal workday ends. So we're not going extra. So.
And I think that's an important piece, that as we go through this, there's a point in time where we have to draw a line on time. And particularly if we are going to not be able to complete something, we want to be able to communicate that to parents and families as soon as possible. We haven't had to get there yet, but I mean, in my mind, it's by the end of our workday, right around 5 o'clock, as far as when we would make that call if we weren't able to complete something in its completion for that day. So that's a piece that we haven't got to yet, but it's definitely a piece we've discussed internally of what that process might look like.
Hi, this is Valerie, and I had a question on nursing and how our nursing staffing is going, because I understand we're short again on nursing staff, and so we had talked to a number of sessions ago about bumping it up by at least one person, but how are our nursing staffing looking, knowing that we're going into flu season and as well as continued COVID season?
Valerie, are you able to hear me okay?
Yes.
What I mentioned in my brief remarks were that our second nurse, the second full-time nurse, her first day will be tomorrow with us.
Right.
And so I believe the committee is well aware that we had our previous school nurse transitioned to a position within SSM at our wellness clinic. And so we have hired, and tomorrow will be the first day that the new nurse will be partnering with Jenny to get to know the district and get familiar with our processes.
Yeah, and Val, that position went from half-time to full-time.
Okay.
So that was the increase that was approved. So as it was filled,
So
it was.
the increase was just half a position, because I must have misunderstood. I thought it was a full position, so that we go from 1.5 FTEs into 2.5 FTEs, but we went from 1.5 to 2?
We went, yes, correct, from 1.5 to 2.0.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and then to assist with that also, Val, we have the approval from the board to go up to 3 additional contact tracers. So we have 1 on board, we have another one that we are vetting out and posted right now, and then we'll continue to evaluate that as we move forward.
And Jenny, based on what you're seeing, does that 2 looks okay? I'm a position that works closely with nursing staff, and when you have a kid seizuring, you need to be able to grab somebody. So, or when you're wondering if that's what you've got going on. And so I just want to make sure that, you know, one of our thoughts was processes as all the new kids come in, and I just want to make sure we're still covered there, so to speak. Hopefully my words are coming out. It's really a Monday, and things are just Monday and COVID brain, and words are just not flowing correctly. I'm not an English person.
I think I've got you, Val, but I would say that I think it's a start. It's more than what we've had, so I'm very happy with another full-time nurse on board, and all we can do is see how it goes.
Great.
Don't you also have a backup pool that if you use surge, you can call those in?
Yes, we've been using a substitute nurse pretty much every day for the last, probably getting close to 2 months now, I would guess, just because we had some things happening. And that's working well. Again, Jenny, you work with her more closely than I do, but from what I gather from the meetings and conversations that we have, the substitute nurse is now at a point where she is relatively independent as well in the work that we're asking her to do.
Yes.
So if this expands and we need that, we've got that resource.
Absolutely.
All right. Any other contacts with regards to contact tracing, nursing services, or any of that process? All right. There's a couple items that we would like the committee's feedback on additionally. One is with regards to communication that we've been sending out regarding any of the COVID incidents. We've been following fairly strictly the guidelines from Public Health, Madison-Dane County, and recently they've made a shift as far as what some of their recommendations are as far as how we communicate about those incidents. Kurt and I had a conversation as far as whether we should stick with what we are currently doing, or if we should make a shift to more align with what Public Health is recommending, which would just be a decrease in some of the communication that you might see from us. So I'll let Kurt just kind of give you the high-level overview, and then we'd just like to see the committee's impression and thoughts with regards to that.
Yeah, so how we would shift and how it would be different from what we've done since the beginning of our messaging is Public Health has indicated, this was 2 or 3 weeks ago now on their weekly call with school districts, is we would not have to message if the positive case was not contagious when they were last in our building. And that is a pretty significant number of the messages that we're sending right now under this guidance that we have. We would not have to send messages to families or staff. And again, it's all dependent upon if this person who tested positive, student or staff, was considered contagious at the time that they were last in the building. If they were not in the building during that window, we would not need to send a message. So that would decrease pretty significantly the number of messages that we are doing. There would be many days where there probably would not be a message if we made that shift.
I think the piece we tried to do when we walked into this and its onset was to be as absolutely transparent as possible. So all of the messages that we sent, we followed very strictly what Public Health was providing us. And now with this new latitude, we're really rethinking is should we follow that or stick with what we have? We have had feedback. Obviously, some people want some more information, of which we can't do. But there's also some folks having message fatigue as far as getting too many messages. And then that's generating its own level of dialogue. So we thought this would just be a place we could get some feedback on kind of what this committee and would think about if we should just stay with what we have and continue to move forward in an effort to be as transparent as possible, even if we have cases where someone was in school and it wasn't at their infectious point. Or do we move more closely with what public health is recommending at this point? Anybody have a feeling on that or a thought on that piece? And I guess Aaron and Valerie, I'd value what your opinions would be from a staff perspective as well.
This is Valerie, and I would lean more toward staying how we have been doing it. I do answer questions periodically on these kinds of issues. Staff are finding out that those cases are there, so it's very likely that staff would find out a student had tested positive and then would not understand why you didn't send out an email or a contact about it. So if you do decide, if the committee does decide that's the way to go, I think you need to be very clear and transparent with staff about why you're decreasing it, your communication with them, so that they, there's a lot of fear of getting COVID by the adults. So when the communication decreases, then the fear does not decrease with it. So the fear will increase. And so I think you need to be really clear with staff as to why you're not sending out more and that it hasn't changed their risk in any way.
Aaron here. I find that my students do better when they have more information about what's expected and why they're doing it. Valerie makes a good point about fear and unknown and stuff. I suspect that it will look from the outside like the COVID numbers are dropping, whether they are or not. Whether that's a good or bad thing, not up to me to decide, but I think that's going to be one of the unintended consequences.
Okay. Others on the committee, thoughts about keeping our practices the same or aligning more closely with what public health is advising at this point?
Yeah, hey guys, this is Matt. I think that, the point about visibility is important, and I think that doesn't necessarily mean you have to necessarily continue with the same process you've had currently, but what I'm hearing is people want information, and so whether that's sharing data at a higher level, on a weekly or semi-weekly basis, I think that if there's not, an action that's required, from a notification, I can see how the notification might not be as useful, but I do think that having the overall visibility, we found at least people really want to know what's going on, generally speaking, and especially given where we are as a community, anything that highlights the fact that we have active and significant ongoing transmission, I think is helpful, hopefully in modifying or make people consider their behaviors.
Okay.
Yeah, this is Jeff. I think similar to Matt, from the purely medical perspective, if they're not contagious, there isn't like a pure medical benefit in necessarily sharing that information, but I think there is a perception of transparency benefit in sharing that. And, not speaking as medical, but as a parent, I've been impressed with the ability of the Waunakee community to very quickly figure out when you send out that note who you're talking about, just because they triangulate with other families who do or don't have this staff member. It takes them about 45 minutes to find out there's something going on. So I think sending that communication, even if you call out not transmission, not infectious, I think that just helps solidify that message that you've been sending out, that you're being transparent, because they're very masterful at figuring this stuff out.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking from the community, because the numbers are going up, and I don't think anything that would give the appearance that the numbers are going down, whether it's less communication or not, I think is sending the wrong message. I mean, our numbers are clearly, where we're living, it's going up. I mean, so I'd be worried that the impression would be that somebody's trying to hide numbers that you're not really trying to hide. You're just changing how you're reporting them. Personally.
Would there be some value though in sometimes, you'll get multiple messages in a day stating these different cases and you almost start to glaze over them a bit. Would it be better to just do one message a day listing each one in there?
That's what we've been
I
doing.
think that's what we've been doing.
I noticed that a little bit now, but I couldn't tell for sure that that's what was happening.
You're getting a couple, you're getting it from Rebecca through the board, and you'd probably only be getting one though, Dave, so I'm not, that we're trying to package them together if there are multiples.
Okay. I saw that somewhat, but I wasn't sure if
We
that was
usually
the
wait until later in the day to see if anything else develops. Okay. So I generally, does everybody else on the committee agree with that? That's kind of a better route to go? Okay.
Yeah, I think consistency is
All right,
best.
awesome.
We've had enough back and forth with plans and ideas and stuff.
Okay.
I want to keep it the same.
All right, sounds great. Super, thank you for that feedback. The next one's one that we absolutely want some feedback on, and it's with regards to disinfecting surfaces. In the packet in front of you, you have a memo that John Kramer sent to Steve Summers and I. It just summarizes what some of our cleaning and disinfecting processes have been. And our processes were put in place this summer as we were starting to bring back our camp kindergarten students in summer school, and then as we transitioned into our K2 kids, and then into 3rd and 4th grade. The piece that we're now sitting here in November articulating is, are those the right and necessary practices to be following, particularly as we look to open up additional classrooms? And if I just give an example, one of the things we're trying to do is we're cleaning surfaces. We're disinfecting surfaces during the 1.5 to 2 hour break between the cohorts at the K2 or K4 level right now, before morning and afternoon comes in. When you start to look at being able to do that, and let's just use a high school example where you have 90 classrooms and you have 10 minutes of passing time, you cannot possibly have enough people to go and do that. So part of what we've been researching and taking a look into and looking at what other districts that are more fully open than us are doing, and we really need some feedback on really the transmission of COVID from surfaces and what our practices should be. So when I've taken a look at like CDC guidance, it's talking about disinfecting once a day. It's also, I've looked at things from like, I'm sure a very medical professional, WebMD, was talking about things that was really just articulating the challenges of COVID coming from, or not the transmission of it from a surface to a person isn't necessarily something that's easy to do, to transmit. So the question that we have is with regards to surface transmission and what our current practices is and how we may need to evolve and just can be make sure that we're doing the right things, but we're also doing it in a manner that's not just making sure we're using our resources wisely. So what I'd like to do is turn it over to Steve Summers, who's on our Zoom link, and John Kramer, just to walk through what we're currently doing and some of the thoughts that they have moving forward. John's got a little bit of show and tell just to show you all the different things we have so that there's a visual to the topics that we're talking about. So I told them they have about 10 minutes just to kind of walk through this piece, because I think it's an important piece as we continue to move forward and to build confidence that we are trying to do what is best for our students, our staff, and our community with regards to disinfecting, but we want to be able to do it in a way that's also manageable and effective. So Steve and John, I'll turn it over to you for a few minutes.
Okay, thanks Randy. I'm just going to start with my show and tell card. Get that out here.
Yep. John, why don't you come up to the blue X so that we pick you up on them.
Thanks Randy. So like Randy said, I'm John Kramer, Director of Facilities, and what I've described here on the front page of the memo is what we're currently doing at our K through 4 elementary schools for cleaning and some other things that we put into place, like the needlepoint bipolar ionization. And you can read through those bullet points, but as Randy alluded to, the surface disease spread is part of our concern, because right now we have our high school with very limited students in that building. We have our high school custodians going to elementary schools to help them, and actually only one elementary school is being helped with additional staff. So the additional staff cleans between the AM and PM kids. And the reason that I'm showing you these things and up here to talk about getting more kids into the school is that model may not be sustainable. With the page 2 component for the 5th to 12th grade, we would continue doing the things that we do already, and among those things is we use disinfectant with the electrostatic victory sprayer. So here's the backpack model, and that's a chlorinated based disinfectant tablet. We also have, every custodian has a handheld victory sprayer so they can walk around with ease through the school buildings and use that. Another disinfectant we use is, some of you guys may be familiar with, Quaternary based Ammonium disinfectant. This is a strong disinfectant we use in restrooms. We've provided each school with wipes, like for copy areas, smaller areas that need a more compact package. We have these wipes with labels that we put on. We provided every classroom with this 800 count bucket of wipes, so the teachers can feel confident that if they need to grab a wipe, they can. We provided these jugs of hand sanitizer at each entrance that is in use, and more. We provided every single teacher in the district a bottle of 8-ounce refillable hand sanitizer. And that's pretty much it for my show and tell. We do have a portable needlepoint bipolar ionization fan that we can use in our isolation rooms. Let me just hold that up. So this has a unit in it that's very similar to what we put in our air handler systems. It just creates positive and negative ions, which is pushed through the air then by our air handling systems. So we're going to continue to do those things as we get the 5th through 12th graders in. But like I said, some of the equitable components that we've been looking at is how to do that between cohort movement, similar to what we're doing with AM/PM sessions at the elementaries. And as you guys alluded to earlier, we don't have the staff to stage at every classroom to get in when the bell rings. So, excuse me, I'm running out of breath because I'm talking so much.
Can I just interject for a second?
Yeah.
And one of the questions we have is transmission of COVID from the surface. I mean, how important is it that that has to be cleaned between me and Dave using the same table throughout the day versus it being cleaned at night? I mean, obviously I understand that there's the benefit of cleaning every time, but when you look at kind of the size of this, it's trying to figure out what is the most prudent pieces. And I know Steve and I've had conversations that, I'm kind of going to your guys' expertise, where we go into like the waiting room or wherever a common area is at a clinic or a hospital, there's not somebody there wiping everything down. And just trying to get a sense of, if we're doing this once a day, to what level do we have to be cleaning surfaces to help really reduce and mitigate risk, and how much of a risk is COVID existing on a surface and its transmission to actually spreading disease. So operationally, that's just an area we'd really value some feedback on, and hear what you've all done within, obviously, the hospital and clinic community, which definitely is dealing with similar type issues.
I believe it's mostly a respiratory virus. I do believe that, and I think we're sort of treating it as a respiratory virus primarily now. I think that the people it's the number of people flowing through a space probably matters more than what they're doing with contact. And from my own experience watching, most of the people I have who have had contact, who've gotten the disease, is a respiratory exposure. I mean, and they're pretty clear about where they eventually got it. I know that obviously the clean is never bad, right? I mean, clean is never bad, but I personally have I don't wear gloves when I go everywhere in town. You know, we do use the hand sanitizer. I wish I mean, if you said you're gonna hand sanitizer out, I'd probably feel better about it than most of the other things.
And I think that's exactly what you were thinking. I mean, the gallon jugs, we have enough of those for every classroom. So that could be a piece where kids coming in and leaving would have access to that type of a hand cleaning product. Is that accurate?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. Other thoughts with regards to surfaces?
I think something that's going to be important is kids and cell phones, and just how dirty they could get. I mean, we struggle that even with healthcare, you know, on our cell phones for different things, and not regularly cleaning those. So that's something else.
Sure.
Our shared workspaces are being cleaned about once a day.
Okay.
So they're not being cleaned between each person,
No.
it's just more daily.
We clean between each visit, I mean, but not, we clean the surface spaces and change paper type things.
Sure. That's in your examination rooms. That what you're
But
talking
like in
about?
your waiting room, you're just cleaning the waiting
That's a
room once a
nighttime
day.
thing right now. Yeah, but we also don't have many people, and we're running you through the waiting room. You don't get to stay in the waiting room, you're
Right.
car to room pretty much.
And I'm referring to like shared computer workstations that you might find, you know, in a hallway. I'm not in a clinic setting, I'm in a hospital setting.
Okay.
I think good hand hygiene and making sure that you're not touching your mucous membranes.
Okay. Other thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think it's a little bit tricky. So, you know, in a perfect world, ideal state would be that we wipe those things down in between users. So for those high-touch services that are shared, i.e. desktops, you know, best practice would. At the same time, transmission through surfaces is probably less than respiratory. So then it becomes kind of like a risk-benefit decision. You know, clearly it seems easy if you do it in your K through 4 where they're stationed at a desk and you have time to clean in between. If you have a high school example where they're switching classes, you could forgo it, knowing that that does, to a small degree, increase your risk of transmission between students. If you have a COVID positive student at a desk and then a COVID negative comes and manages to pick up enough concentration of virus to infect themselves, they would get sick. But I agree, there's no way you're actually bringing in school staff to clean all those rooms. You'd have to have some process whereby students are wiping down their desks when they leave or when they arrive. To try to mitigate that risk. That might be a good compromise position. Yeah, risk is small, but you do increase your risk slightly if you have shared surfaces that are high touch, that are uncleaned in between users.
And that's a great point, Jeff, that you brought up. I mean, that was a piece that was initially part of our discussion, was having particularly our older students help with wiping down. The challenge we ran into is the feedback from like our MSDS sheets and some of those other pieces really stating that use by children was not recommended, and that's been kind of articulated down from the product providers, etc. So we've been cautious with regards to these being disinfecting agents being used, even though some of these are similar to products we probably use in our own home, but being more of a public institution and having kids do it, that's causing concern certainly to us. And as we and so then it kind of falls to adults, and there's just not time from a teaching standpoint to be able to manage that. So really kind of a question of if we're not able to do that, to what level of risk is there on the surface?
Yeah, no, I hear you there. Yeah, I mean, it certainly increases your risk, but yeah, it's not a big increase, but it's definitely, there's something there. It'll be higher than if you had cleaned them, yeah.
Yeah, and I agree with Jeff. I think that, you know, if you do decide to go with not clean in between, I think the comments about hand sanitizer, and I think just the student education of, you know, not eating in the room, you know, not touching their mouth, not touching their eyes, I mean, all the usual things that we talk about during this time of year, at baseline. So I agree, the risk is probably not huge, but it's higher than otherwise, so it would be ideal. But if not, I think it's really the hand hygiene. I think the foam in, foam out, kind of thing would obviously reduce your risk, as well as just continued education with the students.
I think the last piece, and you guys probably thought of this, but don't feel like you need to use disinfectant in between each one. Like ideal, that's ideal, but the virus is pretty easy to disrupt. If you just have soapy water, and you would then feel comfortable with students using just soapy water, that might be better than doing nothing. Although I totally get it, where anytime you're putting chemicals in front of kids, that probably raises some eyebrows.
Yeah, I mean, there are some wipes that I believe are less toxic. I'm not exactly sure, I can't list those off, but are any of those products, if we did have those, you're saying, Jeff, that those would potentially be enough to disrupt it from it being?
Water would work fine.
Right.
Yeah, I think so. The virus itself is not all that hardy. So, anything, even with a soap in it, that disrupts that fatty membrane of the virus is likely to make it essentially inactive. I don't know if we've got great studies on just regular soap and water, but I think it would be relatively effective. Even simple things like that, you don't have to worry about it being hot or cold or anything like that. The fact that you disrupted that fatty membrane would make it have a whole lot more difficult time infecting someone.
That's good. That's great.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I heard the same thing, Jeff. I agree that even up to 85% of the viral load can be wiped out if it's just even water in a towel. But of course, then you have a dirty towel with virus in a bucket or virus in a trash can, but it may remove it from the surface.
I know that the CDC has a list of different cleaning solutions, so you might be able to kind of go through there and read to see if there might be some that are more appropriate than the ones you're using.
But from what I'm hearing, if we were to drop down to a lower level item that wasn't the high potent disinfectant, there's still the potential that can have a positive impact on mitigating the virus.
Yeah.
I recently interacted with the public health department in Madison, and she also, Dr. Potoff, recommended soap and water for cleaning surfaces for us.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, great. Again, that's what I heard as well. The disinfectant will 100% kill the virus if it's in the appropriate dwell time and it activates upon it.
Right.
But I agree with you guys. Yeah.
Well, that's good feedback. Others have feedback on that topic for us, because that's one that we're certainly wanting to continue to evolve our practice around. All right. Go ahead, John. Anything else that you have that you'd like to show or ask questions about, or Steve?
No, I think that's it for me.
Randy, the only thing I would add is, for those interested, John shared his research with what other high schools that have brought students in and have had students in for a while, what they're doing. And it ranges from a couple of districts that took a stance regarding teachers' roles with cleaning, to other districts that have just provided the cleaning materials, to most of them just saying, for practical reasons, cleaning surfaces between periods at the high school is not possible. So you can look and see what districts that have had students in person have been doing. And it's just a good reference for us to understand what's occurring in other high schools in Wisconsin, and just to be aware of what others are doing. So that is included on page 3 for anyone who's interested in taking a look at it. I think it's also important to know, when you look at John's outline for cleaning practices, our intentions are to have large supplies of hand sanitizer outside every classroom, and our combination of the ionization system, requiring masks, hand sanitizers, available disinfectant in every classroom, from what I've read from what other districts are doing, should absolutely be considered best in class from what we're seeing other schools doing. So we are putting a significant investment into this. And John has really outlined that on page 2. But for those who are interested in knowing how what we're suggesting compares to other high schools, you can see that on page 3.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Any other feedback, questions, or thoughts around that important topic for us?
I think with your HVAC system, are you guys like increasing your circulation at night and like on the weekends and stuff?
So I've contacted our mechanical contractors, and they've assured me that we're bringing in the maximum amount of fresh air during the pandemic era that we should be.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So the two things we've done with our HVAC is increase the airflow and also the ionization system that was added to all of our buildings, including the one we're in right now. Okay, wonderful. Thanks, John. Thanks, Steve. Okay. The last item under this agenda item we wanted to talk about was community-wide data. In your packet, you will see the 2-page ledger-sized document that really shows on a weekly basis, really what's on a continued basis, daily basis, really what's going on within our own community. Kurt, if I can just have you kind of touch base on some of the high-level pieces that you and Annie have been tracking, and kind of what you're seeing with regards to the data and how you're feeling that as far as the work that we're doing in the district.
Sure. As you can see, since the last 2/3 of October, the level of positive cases has certainly increased from where we were trending. The other thing that I think is interesting to note, I guess I'm not quite sure what it means, other than I know around the same time Public Health had a change in their hours at the Alliant Energy Center testing site. But you'll see from around the middle of October to now, the peaks and valleys are greater than they were in the middle part of September. You just didn't see, one day going from 36 positives down to, what did we go down to? About 5. You just didn't see those big changes on a day-to-day basis like we're seeing now. So I don't know what that means or why that's happening, but that's just something I think that's new, is we just see those big differences from one day to the next. We are certainly seeing more cases in our community. It's also being reflected if you turn then to our district data. You will see that we have more staff being positive, more students being positive, more staff close contacts, more students close contacts. I will just share the number of students not attending due to symptoms of illness for today. I did not receive, I received 4 buildings, but I didn't receive any of them before we decided to publish this. It was a busy day today, so that wasn't high on their priority of getting to me information about the number of students who are not attending school because of symptoms that really aren't related to COVID, because we have started to see an increase in strep throat and other illnesses that we normally see in our schools, and we're starting to see an uptick in those as well. I do have 4 of the 6 schools now. When I get the other 2, we will update this chart and post it online with that column. As you'll see, as you continue to work your way through the tables that make up this data dashboard, when you get to the last section in Dane County, you'll see this significant increase that our county has had in the last week as well. So it's up. But then again, if you look at our last 2 days, in our census tract, the numbers are quite low. So again, I'm not quite sure what that means either. So I guess if I want to summarize, we're just seeing a lot of fluctuation in what we're seeing right now, but we are seeing an increase over where we were a month ago.
I think it's fair to say that as the numbers go up, our folks doing contact tracing can absolutely feel it. But as of right now, and I think that was the question Jeff was asking earlier, was thus far we've been able to keep up with what's been in front of us. And in some of that's probably a little bit of how it's fallen and being able to address it. And part of it's the staff are doing an awesome job of staying on top of that work. That's really the data update where we're at. Any thoughts, comments, or questions with regards to that data dashboard before we move on?
I guess the question is really interpreting that data. You know, what number do we bring kids back, or what number don't we bring back? You know, I haven't heard any of that. And I guess what I would like to understand, and it seems like we're getting some favorable feedback, is the process that we're using, the cleaning that we're using. It seems like we're doing everything that we can to make our buildings safe. You know, we just passed a referendum of $2 million to, on an annual basis, you know, to support COVID expenses. And is there anything else that we should be doing in order to make our buildings safer? And I guess that's what I would like to know out of this committee after the last several meetings and what we've heard and discussed. What else can we do?
So you're talking like operationally, what are other things that we should consider doing?
That's correct.
That we should be implementing to make our schools and our environment as safe as possible. Is there anything from the committee that would lend itself that might be helpful for us in our planning moving forward?
You know, I'm sure people have some ideas. I would say kudos to the team. I think that the operational processes you guys have put in place have really been outstanding, and I think that that's great. I think that, to Kurt's point, I think you are seeing the impact of weekend and hours changes in those fluctuations. I think we see that pretty consistently where, you know, coming in over the weekend in the early part of the week, things are a little bit lower and they pick up later. So I think that's one. I think the biggest issue that we have right now is, you know, our people live in the community, and whether they're acquiring it at school or they're acquiring it elsewhere, which I think probably is more likely that they're acquiring it elsewhere. I really appreciated the email that went out imploring the community to stop attending gatherings, and I think that probably one of the best things that the district can do is to continue to reinforce the need for people to follow those best practice guidelines, because there's just a significant amount of stress within all of the health systems. Right now, we have, you know, every day it's a new record for number of hospitalizations, and it's really impacting the care people, you know, receive. So I'm not sure that there's an explicit operational detail that we could tell you, or at least that I can think of, to say this is going to fix, you know, the problem. I think this is really a lot about, you know, what people are doing just generally. I think the other thing that I would just call out a little bit is we certainly are seeing in our data the asymptomatic positive rate is substantially higher now than it ever has been. And so I think that's one of the things that we're concerned about as well, is because of the level of community spread that we have, it's very likely you have asymptomatic people who are positive in your schools. And so I think the processes are probably, you know, are pretty tight at this point, but I think you're still going to have that risk of people who don't know they're infected and has a lot of downstream secondary impact. So I think those are just the things about data that I would comment on.
I can verify the rate is high. I mean, it's high, and our system is least as stressed right now at the hospital. Every day we get a note whether we're going to operate or whether we're going to have scheduled surgicals or not. I can tell you I had several positives today, in the community. So my concern is that it's the community problem, is that it's not the school necessarily, your procedures can be perfect, but it's still a process. And unfortunately, as I watch this, I've had a 29-year-old, a 32, and a 37-year-old in the hospital in the last 2 weeks. And so it's sort of like it's risk management process, right? I mean, you have people who are working in your schools who are in those age demographics, not just 60-year-olds that are working there. And they are certainly being exposed, right? So not trying to be, when we talked about this at the beginning, we said a little bit like, hey, if the numbers get obnoxious, we have to deal with it. You know what I mean? And the numbers are literally obnoxious right now, so as far as I'm concerned. And I don't know how I don't think that's the school's fault. And I think your letter that I read, was correct. It's online. It's the secondary problems, and I don't know how you control that. It's secondary exposure, but to a certain extent, saying, "Hey, you can come to school," does that mean I can go to dance? I mean, that's sort of this never-ending process of a community. And so, as the community person right here, I go, "Oh God, we're in it right now." So I'm sorry. I worry about it.
I think this conversation really kind of dovetails into the last topic, which is, the board is going to be meeting here shortly.
Well, just a second. There was one process question, though, that was specifically asked by some of the staff. And it's the issue of about, we have our check-in form that the staff fill out each day. And there's some staff that are regularly checking, that they have a runny or a stuffy nose, sore throat, the headache, fatigue. And then there's a follow-up box where they mark, do they think it's attributed to, like, allergies? And they'll say yes. Well, now somebody's checking this 7, 8, 10, 15 days in a row. Is there a point where somewhere in the process it should say that we need to do something more than just say, well, they think it's allergies, so they stay and keep operating?
Right.
Is there some process, or is there some trigger point where we should say, after X number of days, we've got to do something more? Or do you just?
So obviously, I see it as if there's a new set, then they get tested. We send people to get tested with new symptoms, right? But I have allergies. I know I have them. They're a steady state. So to me, it's change in state matters, but steady state doesn't matter very much. And I don't know how to operationalize that necessarily. Where you say, hey, have you had a change in your congestion, fever? But we don't, on our form either, it doesn't have people just go and pass over it because they know that's their stable state.
So it's about making staff aware that if there's a change in state, it should trigger.
Right, that would trigger to me, is a change in state.
So we gotta figure out some way to.
And Brian, you have some of those conversations on a daily basis.
If I could comment, the staff are really taking those questions seriously, and they really struggle because frequently they may have some little symptom that they can attribute to non-COVID issues, but if they're going to be honest, they're going to check it yes, and they're going to be told they've got to stay home. And so there's this really difficult position trying to fill that out, to be honest and not lie about what's going on in your body at the same time that you're trying to fill that out in a way that doesn't trigger you to stay home when you know you're okay to come to work. So if you're going to make changes, you need again to put a lot of information out there and be clear, because staff have really struggled with completing that every day.
So is there?
I just want to jump in and echo that new symptom equals test.
Yeah.
Right. So everybody can have seasonal allergies, but at the time when you have new onset seasonal allergies, even if they're similar, I think that it's really important that people know that we need to be getting tested for those changes, like Phil was mentioning. Because a lot of times we can attribute it, and we've seen this a lot. People say, oh, I thought it was such and such. And it ends up that no, it's COVID. And so I think that changes and new, stressing that is the most important thing.
So we need to bring that in. So.
Brian, how you deal with the red X the most? You deal with it for our district. So can you speak to what you're seeing and how you kind of work with staff on that?
Well, I guess I would echo both what I heard from Valerie and what heard from Dr. Rannum is the advice that we had been given going into that was how does your body typically react? You know, how do you normally, what is your normal state? How do you normally react when the pollen count goes up, when the mold count goes up? And ask people to reflect on those questions. And I feel like I'm a little bit out of my lane here because I'm talking to doctors and nurse practitioners who all the time, you know, you're trying to get into people's minds to understand their bodies, right? And there is only the only person that truly understands how different is what they're experiencing from what they normally experience is the individual taking the survey. What I would say is, absolutely, staff have struggled with that. And if they ask for counsel, you know, I will often push them back to say, you know, I can't advise you on that. Talk to your healthcare provider if you have questions. You know, and if possible, we want to take the safest road possible. But you know, certainly, I also have heard Valerie say, information is very important to folks. The struggle I have is one, making sure that folks look at that information, but two, get it to them in a way that's manageable for them to complete this daily survey and not just glaze over and check the box at the bottom of the page so that they know that it's done.
We've also had this with students as well, where students will have a runny nose or a little congestion or a sore throat, scratchy throat, whatever you want to call it, and parents will say, well, it's allergies. Well, we have kind of changed our approach to that where we're less accepting of that, and now we're asking actually for them to contact their physician, their healthcare provider, to see if their healthcare provider, in talking with them, because again, there's a little history there of what this has been, and trying to get some input then from a healthcare provider to say, yes, this is what it is. What we have found, which I think echoes what Dr. Anderson and Dr. Random have both said, healthcare providers are less reluctant than maybe before to say, yep, that's what it is, it's allergies, without having a COVID test done. And we've actually found a few positives in that change in approach, where we're now seeking some input from a healthcare provider before we're really allowing that student back into our building. If we're seeing a couple, we're generally doing it if we see 2 or more symptoms.
Shouldn't we be doing the same thing with staff? If they're filling out that form with 2 or more symptoms, why wouldn't we do the exact same thing when we see it on a staff form versus a student form?
Well, I would say the number one difference is that staff are adults and better able, instead of answering, again, there's that level of interpretation, right? If you're a parent interpreting for your child, you know, you're now having to try to get inside their thoughts, and if they're young or little, I mean, that's not an easy thing, versus if you are an adult, again, I do believe that adults know their own bodies best and should be able to answer that question, as opposed to us dictating to them what could be very typical for them. But again,
I also may interject. You can have 20 to 50 kids out of school in one day and things can still hum along as they were before, but you can't have 20 to 50 teachers out and still keep the schools running. So if you're going to have everybody who has any little thing getting tested, you're going to have a lot of people out on a regular basis getting their tests, waiting for their results, and then you're not going to have a whole lot of schooling because we're all going to be at the Alliance Center and then waiting for our results before you let us back in the door. We don't have those kind of subs right now, or we haven't been.
Yeah, guys, hey, this is Jeff. So just for context, if you look at the health systems and we look at employees who end up testing positive, about 40% of them came to work with symptoms, and they thought exactly this. It was nothing. I just had a scratchy throat. I just had allergies. So although hugely disruptive to have a hair trigger on those kind of seemingly benign symptoms, if you don't have a hair trigger, you'll have much bigger problems than just not teachers not to teach. So you'll be really careful about letting anyone who has new symptoms or change in symptoms or something just doesn't seem quite right and blowing it off. A good number of those are actually going to have COVID-19 right now with how prevalent it is in the community.
I have a question for you, if I might follow up on that. How often do people get a symptom, get tested, come back negative, later get a symptom and think, oh, I tested that negative last time, so I'm not going to bother reporting it. Maybe I should just go to work.
Yeah, the context for that becomes important is when you look at what kind of test you're using to test. Getting down a rabbit hole, but if you use a test that has less than perfect or less than good performance characteristics, you risk a chance of having a false negative test, which then falsely reassures you, and now you end up coming in with symptoms that you are pretty sure, rightfully so, aren't COVID, and then later on you get a PCR test with maybe a better sample and it's positive. It's a legitimate concern, but I think as you're looking like broad strokes on how you try to reduce disease transmission within the school, I think you've got much bigger fish to fry than the false negative test. So it's totally legit.
I'm not talking about a false negative, I'm talking about a real negative.
A real negative and then you get it later?
And then you actually end up getting it later, but then you ignore it because, oh, I got this before. And I turned out negative, so I was fine, so I want to go to work.
Yep. Yep.
It's that,
if it's a real negative, then whatever that initial thing wasn't COVID-19. If you recover from that and then you have symptoms again, that clock starts over. So now you have to get reevaluated. If it was a false negative, that means you got a negative test result, but it actually was COVID, just not enough where it picked it up yet. Now you actually do have COVID. That first test, from your perspective, was wrong. It should have told you had COVID when it didn't. That's where you can get into trouble, where you now feel reassured, and those symptoms that maybe persist now for 3, 4, 5 more days, you think aren't COVID when in fact that they were.
Yeah, and we do experience that, where somebody will get a test, and then for whatever reason they go back. The first one was negative, the second one was positive. We have seen that.
Right. Yeah.
They just
Yeah,
went a
that'll
little bit
happen.
too
Hopefully that's
soon.
a relatively small number, a couple per 100 people getting tested, but it's real.
Something that we're actually starting to see more of is, I guess it's the false positives, where somebody will go get a test, the first one comes up positive, and then again, for whatever reason, they're going back again and getting 2 negatives after that. We're starting to see that a little bit more. I don't know if you're experiencing that as well.
Yeah, there's a couple things that could explain that. So, one, people who have been positive tend to have viral strands in their nasopharynx for up to 3 months after they've recovered from the illness. It's pretty hit or miss then if you get tested after that acute illness, whether or not you'll test positive or negative. So we've seen that happen. For the most part, those people who test positive and then negative right away, our experts will say more than likely they're probably negative. It's harder to test negative when you really do have a bunch of RNA in there that's active. So that might be a reason for why you're seeing that. But I think a lot of this is some of these tests, even the very good ones, aren't perfect, and you're getting some of these conflicting results, and then it gets really hard because then you really do need someone to look at your case history, what your risk is, and then what's the chance of you being positive or negative. I think it's really hard for just a normal person on the street who's looking at 2 or 3 different test results to actually figure out, is it more likely I'm positive or is it more likely I'm negative?
Well, we are being cautious because most of those multiple testings are happening with a family member.
Mm-hmm.
We are being cautious, and we're actually still saying that the student needs to stay out for 14 days.
Yeah, I don't think anyone will fault you for being cautious with it.
Does that answer your question, Dave?
Yeah, I just think this question was from a staff listening session on Friday, so it's clear that at least some of the staff, and it was echoed by multiple people, we need to make sure that they understand that change in condition or new symptoms, they can't just brush it off as allergies, and they need to talk to their provider somehow in their communication.
Yep.
Okay, so now on to the reopening.
Yep, the last piece here, and we've kind of been talking about all the operational pieces of operating the school. Conversation the board is going to be having and the consideration they're going to be putting forth tonight was based off of a plan that was presented last week of continuing with some of our phased reopening plans with a thought of reopening our 5th and 6th grade, our intermediate school, on the 30th of November, and then a target of trying to bring back our hybrid in 7-12 after the winter holidays at the beginning of the second semester. So that was a piece that the board requested to see kind of what a plan of that nature would look like. That was presented last week, and that's being considered this evening by the board. In addition to just options that we have with regards to winter co-curriculars moving forward and different levels, all the way from not holding them at all to holding practices to allowing them to compete in areas that are allowed in Dane County, all the way up to considering letting them travel to places like Sauk to play out of the county. So looking for really some feedback from the committee or questions that they may have with regards to that at least outline. And I realize COVID doesn't have a timeline for things, but I think the piece that we've continued to come back to, and I think has been discussed at the board level, is how well have we been able to kind of work around and live with and work with COVID in our community as a school, and then trying to kind of value that balance of the need for students to be, and all the benefits that school offer, and balancing that with also the needs of trying to be good stewards to our community around the virus. So I think those are the questions that we're kind of looking for some thoughts and feedback on from the committee, and particularly as we go into in a little while here, conversations about that with the school board. And if we have board members here who can articulate any of their questions that they may have around that.
Mine, it feels a little bit like we're the best boat in the tsunami right now. I mean, it's happening right now. So that's my problem with not with the community, because I think you guys have operationalized and done everything the way you can, but to the point that there are people that are asymptomatic spreaders in the community, and they're here. I mean, they could be here, you know? As far as there's enough of it going around in town, I have a hard time accepting any close timelines. If you want it to be successful, my biggest concern would be that we'd end up starting somebody, a group gets ill, and now you're really backing all the way back down. I think personally, I see that early school thing is very important. I wish we could do June instead of November for school. If I was picking right now, you'd say, which one would you do? I'd say go do June, because I think everything's coming. It's coming. So I feel like we could hold it, if we could just hold it off until it gets here. And I know it's hard for everybody because school is important, but the community is also important. And I don't think the school caused it. I just think this is something that is happening right now. We are in it, and I don't know how else to say it. I mean, every day that's what we're doing. And I would love the vaccine to be here in some form before we say this is going to happen. I think that will happen by the end of the month. It'll be at least high risk and such. So, talking too much. I don't know what you guys think, but we're drowning. So.
Yeah, I agree that the timing is difficult. I think that the amount of spread that we have right now, and things are not getting better, things are generally getting worse. I mean, the state hit over 2,000 hospitalizations today. I think the last time that we met, we were closer to 900 to 1,000. So I think it's pretty challenging right now from that standpoint. I do worry about the asymptomatic spread. Again, I don't think it's the school district's fault. I think that you guys have done, again, an admirable job with things. I think the secondary impact of the community, and I think the community, as a community, we need to turn this thing around. And so, I do have concerns about the ongoing spread that we see and how just adding things in that may, again, to Bill's point, threaten the K-4. But So again, I don't think it's anything about the school district. I just think that the strain on the health systems, the strain on the community, and the lack of improvement or even stabilization that we've seen at this point make the timing very difficult.
Yeah, not to sound like a broken record, but I agree. I think, someone asked, like, what more can we do as a school district? And I think you've done everything. The policies, procedures you put in place have worked actually better than maybe we even would have thought for K through 4. The problem is the things that you can't control now threaten not only your ability to open additional classes, 5, 6 through 12, but also probably make the next 3-4 weeks even a challenge for keeping K through 4 going. We continue to see record-breaking cases. That's probably not going to stop. There's the people who have symptoms, and I think you've got some ability to potentially catch that. But the problem that we're seeing are the people who don't have symptoms that are in your buildings. So, earlier on in the pandemic, we screen every single person who's going to have a surgery done. So these are people who look healthy, they look fine, they've got cleared for surgery. And when we'd screen them for COVID, we would find 0.2%, 0.3% would be asymptomatic carriers. And that's pretty low, that's probably a reasonable risk. Right now, we're running 3.5% to 4%. So if you extrapolate that to your student population, once you get 30, 35 kids in a room, one of them probably has COVID and is asymptomatic and is at risk of spreading it. So, the more kids you bring back, the more COVID positive people are in your classrooms, and you have no ability to find them because they're completely asymptomatic, but nonetheless could be spreading the virus. And it just wouldn't take too much to all of a sudden find out that you've got a bunch of teachers that are out, hard to run the school, or clusters developing in classrooms that easily overwhelm your ability to contact trace, even with the additional resources. And then there's the, and this is an impossible question for me to answer, but something for you guys to consider. What's the role of the school district in promoting health and safety in the community? And in that vein, we are canceling procedures. I think at all of our hospitals. I can for sure say for University Hospital, Meriter Hospital, people are not getting medical care that they need because I need to repurpose that for COVID positive patients. We have a field hospital open in the state. I really can't overemphasize just how bad of a position that we're in. And even though you guys are doing everything right, anything that would increase further community transmission could be the straw that breaks the camel's back. And then the next thing that just kind of throws more at it is we're about to hit respiratory season, and I think it's hard to know what that will do to the robust processes you have in place right now, how much they'll get tested. So, it's a hard decision. I totally get it. There's risk in going forward. I think I might suggest that we really try to figure out how do we actually keep K through 4 successful until we understand what respiratory season is going to do. And then if we can weather that and we start to see some change in the community, try to figure out how you bring some of those learners back. But my gut tells me that 11:30 is going to be a little bit too soon for that to feel real comfortable.
Yes, Mark.
I'd like to thank you for what you just heard. I guess the question I have, if the data were to cut by 30-some% between now and the start of the second semester, I'm looking at our burden rate, we're 3.5 times what it was at the end of September when we're looking at bringing K4 back. Our 14 and 17-day averages are 3 to 4 times as high. If we can get that number down to more what it was like in late September by the start of the second semester, would that be a more reasonable option for the benefit of the community?
Yeah, I'll chime in. I think that if you can get the numbers, substantially down and we see hospitalizations decreasing, I think that those are what Jeff's getting at. You see the asymptomatic rate going down. I think those are all things that, thinking about, okay, we may be able to bring people back more safely, with the processes that we had in place. I think that everybody would celebrate that. I think that for that to happen, the community is going to need to really see the behavior change starting now, because we know that once we hit the case count, we have multiple week lags in place. So I think that if the board were to align around what Jeff is suggesting, which I fully support, I think that message is, hey, let the community, step up here. Let's change our, gatherings and other behaviors, so that when we hit January, we're improving to the point where we can, give that real strong consideration.
Yeah, I think just to be concise with that, and not trying to say what anyone should do, but I think if there is a decision to postpone, I think a message that goes with that is, as a school district, we're doing everything we can. We need the community's help in order to do this. So how do we as a community figure this out? I know there's lots of efforts to continue to have events that would cause gathering, close proximity, things like that. We don't have direct control over that, but as much as we can influence people in the community to do the right things so that we can get their kids back in school, I think that's a good message. And then of course we should keep watching the data, because as soon as it's safe to do it, we should get our kids back in school. I don't think anyone wants our kids out of school. So I think we keep an eye on that data and keep our fingers crossed. We'd love to see things look better, not only just to get our kids in school, but to make our real jobs quite a bit easier too right now.
An interesting question about part of opening the school has been about co-curriculars and sports programs. There's been some arguments made both ways that co-curriculars, sports doesn't lead to transmission. I'm sure you've all heard of this recent UW, I would call it a survey more than a study.
Yeah.
And a lot of parents are saying that they want their kids to be able to play basketball or wrestling or whatever. And they're saying, and there's been talk that if the high school doesn't do it, if we don't have it within our control, they're going to go to club teams and they're just going to travel out of the county anyway. And that will cause more spread than if we try to run it within the high school. But if we run it within the high school, there's a lot of demand that we let them go out of the county anyway and go to basically almost the same type of tournaments the club teams would have gone to.
Yeah.
Have you seen any sort of version that gives any feedback on, are we better off doing it in the high school? Are we better off saying, keep it out of our schools so that we don't kill K through 4? Or what would help the community or
I
the
think
school?
it's super tricky. I think, for sure, any kind of close contact sport or sport where you're in close proximity, it almost doesn't matter how you run it. The risk is so high that it threatens your ability to carry out school. So it's almost we're deciding whether we're going to have sports or whether we're going to have school. I wish there was a safe way to do it. You guys might be able to do it safer, but it won't be safe. So I think that's the juxtaposition that we find ourselves in, is this strong desire to do things that make us feel like we're more normal and have benefit, but at this point carry such tremendous risk for community transmission that they put other things, i.e. school, at risk. Especially sports is a good example, because those kids are then coming to school the next day, and the night before they may have done everything that you were trying not to have happen in the school and now bringing it to school.
My experience has also been with the grandparents and of all the kids. I mean, kids going to school, it's like, hey, we're gonna have the back to the community thing. We're gonna have the birthday party anyway, no matter what. Right? And now who's got it? Grandma's got it, right? I mean, it's like, it's all sad, right? It's all sad, and we almost as a community have to prioritize which things are more important to us. And to me, that's why I talked about the delay. I think I don't know how you guys feel, but I think we're reasonably close. I mean, it's hard to hold out from doing all the events that it's conditioned right into our culture, right? I mean, they're part of who we are.
I mean, a big part of what we've been talking about is not just the school, but the effect we will have on the community if we do the schooling in different ways. Do you think that us running some version of basketball in Dane County, only working with Dane County schools, there's been a little bit of talk about a Dane County league, trying to run it safer. Is that better for the community, or is it better for the community if we don't do it and there are going to be some kids going out on club sports out of the county and then coming back?
My personal is just about anything you do, you're going to get messed up here, right? It's a tie. Because mine is, I think if the kids are going to be involved, then you have to get the other generation away, right? Which the older generation off of that, and that's hard to do. And I don't have any good answer. I think it's like a tie either way. I mean, it's a mess.
Yeah, I think the indoor sports, you know, like Jeff said, it's hard to have it be, you can make it safer, but it's hard to make it safe. And I think it's one of those things where if the level of community spread were what it was back in April and May, it actually would be a lot safer, you know, at that point, because at that point in time, if you had a bunch of kids, you know, indoors, you know, you probably had a very low likelihood that one of them had COVID. Whereas now you get, you know, 10, 15 kids together and put them in an indoor space, you know, it's every other game you're going to have a kid who's got COVID. And we know that that is going to lead to a pretty high risk of transmission, just given the heavy breathing, the close proximity, all of those things. So I think that, you know, again, if you think about the message, which is if we want to have, you know, these extracurricular sporting activities and things, you know, we're asking you not to go and do some of those things because we all want to have a more normal, you know, season experience, and we can do that by getting the level of community spread down, and these are the things that we need to do over the next 6 to 8 weeks in order to do that. So I don't know that there's a way to make it safe. I think it's a way to, you know,
I think the tricky thing is if you're running your own sports programs, it's hard for you to look at the community in the eye and say, hey, we need you to stop doing this because we need school to be safe. You almost have to model the way, set the example, and say, we don't want you to do this either because we want to have our kids in school, we want to keep our community safe, knowing that some will do it, but I think it puts you in a better position to make the case to the community that this is what we need to do right now to keep our kids safe, our parents, grandparents safe, and get school and sports back to normal as soon as possible.
Do you guys mind if I edit this video and use this to show people as an advertisement?
There you go.
I'm pretty sure that this will not be popular amongst, you know, some folks that, you know, all of us are, you know, care about and want to support. I mean, I want my kids to be able to get back in and do these things 100%, you know, and it's very painful, you know, not to have them doing it right now. But when you think about, to Jeff's point earlier, the surgeries that we're canceling, the care that we're not able to provide to people, and you think about the impact of that, and so I think it's, you know, what if your parents, what if your spouse, you know, wasn't able to get something done, you know, because of all the other things that we're having to do. We want to be able to provide that, but right now we can't. And so it's not going to be long before, you know, many people in our community are going to be touched by somebody being hospitalized or somebody having something deferred that we really want to do. And so it's a super hard, and I appreciate, I mean, it's hard for us, it's hard, you know, for everybody. But, you know, if we don't do these things, I think what we run the risk of is having this be much more prolonged and much more painful. So it's I feel for you. It's a terrible, you know, position to be in, and I'm hopeful that it goes away as soon as possible because I want to see my kids get back out on the basketball court and you know, playing and being able to go to the games and do all of those things.
This is hard.
Yes, Mark.
I do have a second question, not related to this, but related to contact tracing. Could we take a moment, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is the chance to get them answered for about a month.
I'm not only a board member, but I'm a parent of a first grader whose class was quarantined because an inability to determine what the contact points were. And actually, this is a parental concern as much as in communicating with the teacher was concerned. A number of these kids are in fact at home, but going to the wraparound care for their educational services. So I guess as a school district, my question is, do we need to be communicating with the wraparound care people that these cases are happening and that the kids should not be there, or is that considered a marginal thing because there's not a certainty they've had contact? I know there's concern from the teaching staff. I've spoken with the daycare provider my son goes to, and we're keeping it at home for the instructional piece of it. But from our perspective as a school district, what would be our best practice?
Yeah, we are, and I would say within the last couple of weeks, we have started to have more communication with our child care providers as well as our 4Ks to make sure that we're communicating when we have something that impacts them. It is a bit of a delicate balance because HIPAA, this is being recorded, isn't it? HIPAA doesn't allow us to really say what's going on, but we kind of massage and bend that without breaking it so that we get our message across. In our communications to families, we put in there that the children should not basically leave their home for the 14 days unless they need to seek medical attention. That's what our communication is to the families when we make that communication. And like I said, we have over the last 2 weeks had some direct communications with providers, and it's kind of been a two-way where they have had something happen in their setting that has made those students a close contact. So they're sharing that with us so that we know we can expect those students not to be in school. And now we're starting to actually follow up with families to verify the information and then sending our email on top of whatever they received from the setting that they were in outside of our school. So I think we're getting more collaboration and better communication with them. We probably have a little ways to go, but again, we're also trying to balance HIPAA and the sharing of that information across systems. I also know that because where public health is right now, as a school district, we get very minimal contact with public health. I believe, just from a couple of conversations that I had last week with providers in our community, they seem to be getting a better response from public health when they call them to say, hey, I've got somebody in my setting who has tested positive. But it is a delay. I mean, it's not immediate, it is a delay. So I think there's some of that that's happening as well, that we may not hear about it right away because the child care settings are waiting for public health to get back to them so they know exactly what's going on before they communicate something out, which can lead to like a day overlap in our setting. We're proceeding forward without the input of public health and sharing that information back to the providers as soon as we've made a decision based on our contact tracing. So it's better, still a little clunky, but it is better.
Well,
Any other
Any
comments
other
with regards to our topics, or our last topic particularly with regards to reopening decisions the board will be facing here tonight?
No, I think I echo what our physician colleagues have said. It's really tough to give the green light when you see what's happening in the community and our hospitals.
I feel like we should be examples and not sending mixed messages. That the priority right now is getting this under control so we can all go back.
And Dr. Random, I know you mentioned about like the vaccine piece, saw the announcements from Pfizer, et cetera. What does that realistically look like? And maybe that's asking you a crystal ball question, so Matt or Jeff, or if anybody has kind of an idea of what you're hearing on your side as far as what does vaccine actually look like, timeline-wise, et cetera.
Mine, I've been telling people, this is not, don't buy stock based on what I'm saying. But it's basically, I believe in January, February, we will get decent high-risk coverage. I mean, people who need to be a vaccine, I believe, will get it in January, February, if everything goes the way it's supposed to. That is not because I know anybody at the CDC or anything like that, but that's just how we're getting things. There's still nothing set up. I think our flu thing, the flu shot thing, was an example of how things could be done, but we don't have anything formalized right now.
Well, I really want to thank you for your time again. I think it would be best to have our next meeting right before the December meeting. So we would do that, so that's the second Monday in December at 6 PM again, if that's all right with everyone. Hopefully, that'll give us 4 weeks to see something better, and really plan for what our next step is. Which, if the board were to look at the second semester, we basically have to be telling people sometime mid to early December, just so with the big Christmas vacation, we won't have as much time between the January meeting and that January 20th. So, thank you for your time. I take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
From Brian,
Yep.
and a second from Bill. I'm sure he's ready to go home. Or you're ready to go right back to the clinic. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you guys, have a good night.
Our regular board meeting will begin, unfortunately, let's say 22, so 7:40. I think it's 7:40.